Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to take a look at Linux Mint 18.2 Sonya, the Cinnamon Edition, which has recently been released as a beta. Also, as of the recording of this video, they also have the beta version of the Linux Mint 18.2 Mate or Mate desktop. However you'd like to pronounce that, that's fine with me. I figured we would take a look around and see what's going to be happening in Linux Mint 18.2, and we'll also talk a little bit about the upgrade process and whether or not you should upgrade your Linux Mint 18.1 to 18.2, and I'll show you a little bit about how that's going to work. So what's the deal here? How does this work? Linux Mint changed their release cycle with the beginning of Linux Mint 17, where they follow the Ubuntu LTS cycle, which means that each series is good for 5 years. For instance, right now we're on 17.3, which is based on Ubuntu 14.04, and 17.3 will be good until April of 2019. Well, this series, the 18 series, is based on Ubuntu 16.04, and as new features and new packages become available, Linux Mint releases a dot release. So we're coming up on 18.2. There's not a huge amount of things that have changed in 18.2, but there have been a couple of very big changes, so we'll get into that in just a little bit. Let's take a look at the new features page. This is just the blog post announcement, and we can learn more about it there. This is what is actually changing in the new Linux Mint. We have the Cinnamon 3.4 desktop, and that adds a bunch of little creature comforts and features. And also they have redone the Spices page, which is where you get your applets for the Cinnamon desktop. They've completely rebuilt that for security. That really doesn't have anything to do with the distribution itself, but there you go. They've improved Bluetooth, so they have worked on that a little bit. They've also worked on the X apps, which are applications that are peculiar to Linux Mint. Here are some of the improvements they have made to the text editor and the X videos application, and Pix, which is actually a fork of GNOME or GNOME's gthumb application, and I like gthumb. They basically put I would say a more friendly wrapper on it. It's not friendly, it's just different. It's like the old gthumb before the GNOME project, or GNOME, whatever you want to say there. I'm getting tripped up by these pronunciations, man. The whole deal there is that the GNOME folks, they changed the way the applications work. They simplified them, and the Linux Mint folks took it upon themselves to address that issue because some users were really upset about the changes. And so therefore in Linux Mint you have these forked applications like Pix and Xed and Xviewer, where they have kind of maintained a more traditional interface, and they work great. I have no issues with them whatsoever. The X apps, so they're talking more about that. That's the PDF viewer there. And they've changed some things with image viewer as far as how the buttons are laid out. Big changes came to Update Manager. Update Manager now has more in-depth help. So they explain more about the kernel update process, which in Linux Mint has always been a bit of a head scratcher, and to tell you the truth, in Ubuntu it's a head scratcher as well, because the Ubuntu project, they maintain several different series of kernels for current distributions, and Linux Mint gives you the ability to choose whatever kernel you want from whatever version of Ubuntu that they have a kernel available from. And for new users, that's like, I don't get it. Used to be that Linux Mint would basically pick a kernel, and then there you go. You're stuck with that as long as the release was going, unless you manually went in and changed it. The Linux Mint project caught a lot of flack for that, and so therefore they changed that and made those kernels available. And now they will auto-update if you set it up to do that. So that's important. They also have a Mint update tool that you can run from a command line. That's kind of useful, except I can't see myself doing that. I wrote a script to do that, and it does it automatically. So I just use the regular apt tools to do those sorts of things. It seems to work out just fine. So there's several little changes in here. Big, huge change is the fact that Linux Mint has dumped the Mint Display Manager, which is what they have used for years, and now they will be using LightDM. What is a display manager? Well, not a display manager, a desktop manager, excuse me. A display manager is a different program. A desktop manager. It is the piece of software that lets you log into your computer, and it also allows you to choose a desktop. It loads up before the desktop loads, and you can think of it as the login screen. Well, Linux Mint has had the MDM or Mint Desktop Manager for years. That has some issues in it. There are some long-standing bugs. For some people, it presents problems. I've never had huge issues with it myself, and I run Mint on several machines, but they have decided that they're going to stop developing their own desktop manager, and they are going to use LightDM, which is what you're familiar with if you've used Ubuntu with Unity. LightDM is used by a lot of distributions of Linux. And of course, Ubuntu will be dumping LightDM, and they will be moving to the GNOME Desktop Manager, or GDM, since they're switching to the GNOME Desktop in October. That's when the big switch happens for 1710, and then 1804 is coming out, and that's going to be the first long-term support release. For Ubuntu with the standard GNOME Desktop, or GNOME Desktop, probably since what? Ubuntu 10.10? A big deal there. And you can configure the LightDM. LightDM is actually pretty cool to work with. They've improved the artwork, and so on and so on and so on. So let's actually take a look at some of these features. We will jump around here and look at the 18.2 version of Linux Mint, which is running in a virtual machine. Before we actually log into the system, here's LightDM. If you're a Mint user, if you're brand new to Linux, you've never used this before, let me just take a moment to show you what it does. Here's where you log in right here. The background image that you get is usually your desktop wallpaper. I think that's how they have this set up by default. That's usually how LightDM works. And then here are some controls over here. You have access controls. You have a few little tiny applets. It gives you the time, and it also gives you the ability to shut down the computer if it's sitting here at the desktop manager, and nobody's logged in. What is a display manager, Joe? Well, that's the thing that actually draws the pictures on the screen. And it is either Xorg or Wayland in Linux. So I went ahead and booted up 18.1 to show you MDM, and they kind of do the same thing, right? MDM, they had this really bright idea that they would rotate pictures in the background, and usually when I install Linux Mint, this is the first thing I turn off, because this can actually cause memory leaks, it can cause problems. So if you just pick one fixed theme without rotating pictures, that seems to take care of that. And if you look at past videos, you'll see that I've done that. Here is where you can do things like suspend the machine, restart the machine, and do things, those sorts of things. One of the things about MDM that bugged me, and always has, is the fact that it will not suspend if you close the lid on a laptop. And there's no way to set that up. So you have a scenario where you are working on your laptop and you log out. You're on the login screen, and then you shut the lid. Well, LightDM will go ahead and suspend the laptop. It'll put it to sleep. MDM won't do that, and never has. So what happens is that you run the risk of thinking that your computer is logged in where it will suspend or shut down, but you're actually on the login screen. You close the lid, then you stuff the computer in the bag, it's still running, and then it overheats your laptop. So I'm glad they fixed that. Let me cancel that. Anyway, back to 18.2 here. So I'm hoping, I haven't tested this yet, but I'm hoping that they've left that feature alone in LightDM when they have implemented it, because under Ubuntu and many other distributions of Linux that use LightDM, that's how it works. So, pretty nice. So let's go ahead and log in. We'll take a look at the desktop. I have made very few changes to this. I have not changed the theme. I've done two things. I have increased the font size, and I have also made the I set an avatar for the user, because it comes up as Mr. Nobody until you set something. So I just went into account details and set that up. So this is the desktop. There's the welcome screen. This is very familiar to anybody who is used to Linux Mint. Linux Mint has essentially basically looked the same for a long, long time. The Cinnamon desktop does not change much, and that is by design to keep it familiar, so people who are used to using it aren't going to get jarred with a new version, and you're not going to get jarred here. This is the standard theme, which is Mint X, that comes up. And we have Nemo still for the file manager, and it works just fine. Nemo is actually one of my favorite file managers and one of the reasons that I use Linux Mint. It's full of features. Now we start to see some new stuff come along when we right-click on the desktop, because you can now sort the icons in many different ways with a click. And then you can also change the size of the icons. So we can just set this to large and we get really big icons. Now, if you're big on using your active desktop, then that might be something that's very useful to you. I do like to have an active desktop. I'm not a fan of this idea of a desktop having absolutely no function whatsoever, but I don't overdo it. I don't leave a lot of files on the desktop. If I'm working on something, I'll drag and drop files all over the desktop, but then before I get done, I'll put them somewhere for storage. So that's a nice little touch there that they have put into the system. And then I guess we can open up pics and take a look at that and see how that's laid out. I don't have any pictures in here, so it's not going to be like it's pretty much the same. They've added some buttons up here at the top, so this is cool. So these dot upgrades between Linux Mint 18, 18.1, 18.2, and 18.3 when it comes along, they're just incremental changes. As packages become available, they upgrade a few things, change a few things about the system. Now, one of the things here that I'm not particularly happy about is the fact that they have gone to the Ubuntu hardware enablement kernel. You say that 3 times fast. Go right ahead, knock yourself out. And so this machine, as of the installation here, let's do uname R. We are running on 4.8.0.54 generic. This kernel is going to be supported, as far as I can tell, till August of this year. So I'm not sure what happens when that kernel no longer is supported. You see, what Ubuntu does is, as they release dot releases of their long-term supports, they upgrade the kernel to what they call hardware enablement kernels. And this allows you to install a quote-unquote long-term support release on a brand new machine that may have hardware that requires drivers and tweaks that aren't available in the standard 4.4 series, which is the long-term support kernel. Gets confusing, doesn't it? So I don't know what this is going to do when 4.8 stops working. They said that it's somehow supposed to detect that, but I haven't dug into that, and whether it will actually upgrade beyond 4.8 and move to the next highest supported kernel that Ubuntu is offering, I don't know. Let's talk a little bit about kernel management in Linux Mint. We've covered this in past videos, but just for anybody who's looking at this. So here's your update manager, and when you first install Mint, it gives you options for levels of updating. You can choose to have it just install everything that's new, which is usually what I do. There's a medium setting that will ask you to approve things like kernels that have the slight possibility of breaking something on your system. and then they have another one which basically just leaves it at whatever kernel it is at and doesn't change it. Now, the problem with not upgrading a kernel and why that's important is because if there is a vulnerability that comes along and you do not have a kernel that includes the fixes to fix that vulnerability, then you are running a system that is liable to be attacked by bots on the net if they can get to it. It just makes it less secure. So you really want to have the latest maintained kernel that you can get onto the system. Now, Ubuntu, as I have stated, has different series of kernels that they maintain. So the current long-term support release kernel for Ubuntu 16.04 is the 4.4 series, which is right here. And then we have the 4.8 series. So this is the 4.8 series right here. And then we have also the 4.10 series, which is in the very latest Ubuntu. This is what is running in 17.04. Okay, so we have all of these different kernel series. You can manually change these in Linux Mint, and it's not hard to do, except when you're rolling back kernels, that becomes kind of a head scratcher, because if you roll back the kernel, let's say that this is on 4.8 and I install this and I want to go back to 4.4, and there are some advantages to being there, then what I'm going to have to do is restart the computer, hold down the shift key, get into the grub menu, boot the machine off of the 4.4 kernel that I have installed, and then I will have to remove the 4.8 kernel that is installed. So right now the active kernel, which they have moved to the top of the list, is 4.8.0.54, and then we have 53 installed. So what you have to do is, occasionally you might want to come in here and get rid of old kernels as well, which is something that's not done automatically. Ubuntu proper will leave you with the last two known good kernels, and anything earlier than that it will get rid of if you run the auto remove option at the command line. So there you go. Linux Mint doesn't seem to do that at all. That's something they may work on here in 18.2. So you can come in here and, like, this kernel's no longer being used. So let's go ahead and tell it we want to remove the kernel. Okay. So it's going to go in here and it's going to take that kernel out. So as I said, the advantages to running the original 4.4 kernel is that if you have that series installed on Ubuntu or Linux Mint, for the entire run of the support cycle, which in this case would be until 2021, if you are running that LTS kernel, you're going to always get updates and security patches on it. And if your hardware doesn't need the extra drivers and tweaks that are in the hardware enablement kernels, then there's really no reason to be on the newer kernel that has a much, much, much shorter support cycle with Ubuntu. So it's very confusing the way Ubuntu handles kernels. It really is. And since Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, they have to follow along, although I do give them props for coming up with a graphic kernel tool to do that. One last thing to talk about before we wind up the video here. I want to open up the Update Manager again because I want to show you how you're going to get your upgrade. So if you are on, well, we're on 18. Let's go over here to 18.2 and just log in. Doesn't matter, it looks the same. Let's try that one more time then. Probably be a little bit easier to see over here. I've got a dark theme activated on this particular virtual machine. So we wait for the Cinnamon desktop to load. Here it comes. It's taking its time. Come on, Cinnamon desktop. Let's do it. This year before Christmas. Is it going to load, ladies and gentlemen? Is something going to happen? Are we going to be staring at a blank screen forever? Is the hard drive spinning? What's going on? Did my virtual machine crash? Oh no. We may have a crashed virtual machine. All right, I'm going to give this 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to go back over to the other one and show you what I was going to show you. So this is the stuff that happens when you're making videos. Everything works smoothly when there's no recording taking place, but boy, you turn on a camera, a recorder, or a microphone, and nothing wants to cooperate. Okay, wait, hold on. We got a flash on the screen. What did that mean? Is it going to work? I don't know. We'll check it in a minute. Let me show you what I was going to show you. All right, so when they come out with the upgrade, what you're going to do is you're going to come over here to one of these menus in here. It's going to appear somewhere, and then you are going to see the option to upgrade to the next version. Let's go ahead. I think I heard that. That logged in. It finally got itself together. Took it forever, but there you go. So this might be a little easier to see for some of you. So in here somewhere, I don't remember exactly where it's going to show up. It's just going to have an option to upgrade to the next version. And when you do that, it's going to go through and it'll take you from 18.1 to 18.2. These are trivial in-place upgrades. They should not break your system. In the past, it does not automatically update the kernel, which is fine if you want to stay on the 4.4 series, because here in 18.1, let's see what kernel we're on. We are on 4.4.0-79 generic. So 7.9 is the revision number, that's the latest. And that's another thing that confuses people is you'll hear that the Linux Foundation right now is talking about kernel 4.11. And, or, yeah, 4.11 I think they're talking about. And people will go, well, wait a minute, this is 4.4, this is a really old kernel. No, it is a current kernel, it's just based on the 4.4 long-term support release version of the Linux kernel. So Ubuntu maintains these kernels to make sure that they are secure and fixes bugs. There is nothing wrong with running a machine on an older kernel if the hardware likes it and that kernel is getting security updates. For instance, Linux Mint 17.3, which is still perfectly viable and I have running on a couple of machines in my house, Linux Mint 17.3 offers the 3.13 kernel, and they're on revision 129 right now. And I have one machine that doesn't particularly like to run on anything above kernel 4.2. So that machine is running on 313.0-129, which is the revision number, and it works perfectly fine. Now, when they drop support for the 3.13 series, which is coming up in 2019, that machine will have to be retired, most likely. But it's a very old machine, and that's how kernels work. Kernels are for your hardware, they're not software related. So you can have any version of a kernel that works best on your computer, and then you can still have updated software. So that's how that works. So anyway, gang, that's a quick look, and I know I didn't get into everything here. Just kind of strolled through the system a little bit and talked about the things that jumped out at me that were interesting. Linux Mint is the most stable Linux out there right now, and I have so many clients that use it, both 17.3, 18, and 18.1 right now. I can tell you it is extremely stable. I think in the case of moving from Linux Mint 18 to 18.1, I would advise you to upgrade if you're running 18. So you want to go ahead and get on 18.1 now if you can. And like I said, that's a very simple small little upgrade. Little program opens up, you close everything else on the desktop, and you let it do its thing. You restart the computer, bam, you're done. These dot releases are very small, in-place upgrades, and extremely safe to do. Now, whether you want to move from Linux Mint 18.1 to 18.2, I don't know. If 18.1 is working for you, then I would be probably inclined to leave it alone. As a matter of fact, this is a question I'm asking myself, because on this machine that I'm doing this video on, the host is running on Linux Mint 18.1, and everything works beautifully. I have no problems with it. Is there enough new stuff in 18.2 for me to jump to a new version? I don't think so. The beauty of how Linux Mint does this is that the 18 series is supported until 2021. So if you're on Linux Mint 18 and you like it and everything works and there are no new features in 18.1 and 18.2 that really float your boat and you want to make you change over, then you don't have to upgrade. You can stay right where you're at. You're still getting security fixes. However, if you've got little bugs in there, if you have hardware issues, little crashes, stuff like that, it might be worth trying an in-place upgrade or upgrading your kernel. You could move to one of these hardware enablement kernels, see if that helps. So they give you lots of options in Linux Mint. I don't know. The way it'll probably work is I'll say, I'm going to stay with Linux Mint 18.1, and then curiosity will get the better of me, and then I will go ahead and run the upgrade. Because that's usually the way I do things. It's like, I'll go, nah, I don't need to change, and then I'll get curious one day, and I'll go, let's see if there's any major difference, which I know there's not. So, but right now I'm going to stick with 18.1. I'm running the beta release just so that I can kind of give the Linux Mint project some feedback if I run across a bug or something like that. I haven't seen anything. It works perfectly fine. It's the Cinnamon desktop, and it does what it's supposed to do. So thank you very much, gang, for watching the video. I will have links to the blog post here in the description for the video, and you can go and look at that. You can also go to linuxmint.com to look at the current versions. I don't know how long this is going to be in beta and how long they're going to keep it this way, probably a month or two. So we might be looking at maybe July, late July or August when the final version comes out, but I'm not really sure about the schedule. So this is probably the only video I'm going to do about 18.2, just announcing the changes. So there you go. It's a look around. Thank you for watching. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook. Check out Easy Linux on the web. And also check out freedompenguin.com for lots of cool stories from contributors like myself. And check out Linux Mint because it is a very cool distribution of Linux. We will do it again soon.